Hello friends and freundins, and welcome to this new episode of the Troglodyte channel, where I will paint and weather this beautiful Jagdpanzer 38T aka Hetzer from Takom in 1/35 scale. I had lots of fun painting this one, so come on and let me show you how I did it. The first thing that needed to be done after the whole vehicle was disassembled was to cover it with red primer. This was done with my standard issued red toxic primer. But I had no issues this time because I was wearing my mask and had pretty good ventilation. Then I used the black primer to paint the tracks and to make some spots on the surface of the vehicle a little bit darker. This is supposed to add a nice shadowy effect if it's done correctly. And it will be slightly visible after I finish painting the tank. So I suppose I did an okay job. Then I painted on the basic color, which is dunkelgelb, or else dark yellow. After I sprayed 2 coats on the vehicle and made sure that everything looks nice, it was time to proceed with the camouflage pattern. I began by painting the road wheels. And there I noticed that the paint wasn't very consistent and would leave tiny little specks left and right as I sprayed over. I cleaned my airbrush and tried it all over again, this time with a little bit more thinner. And when I tried it on a piece of paper, the result was pretty terrible. After a lot of experimentation, because as I have mentioned before, I do not possess the art of the airbrush, I managed to make the spray consistency somewhat decent. Now, having said that, well, it was not decent. And to be honest, I don't even know why I kept going, since I could see that the result was not good, but for some reason I just kept pushing on. Eventually I gave up, seeing that with the airbrush I wasn't going anywhere. And yes, that part was really disappointing. The green had oversprayed terribly, and there were tiny little green flecks all around on the yellow surface, where they weren't supposed to be. So eventually the best thing I could do was to paint everything by hand. This I did with a sloppy glazing kind of method. I used a simple olive green color from Vallejo, which I diluted in water. I went over the surfaces 2 or maybe 3 times, depending on how they looked. And I didn't have to be extremely careful about it. After all, the camouflage sometimes would be painted by brush on the vehicles. Then I painted the thin lines around the green with a dark brown from Vallejo. For this I used a thinner brush and I had to be a little bit more careful so that they wouldn't look too sloppy. I went carefully with my brush all around the vehicle, and that was it. The camouflage part is finished. Then I went back and painted the tracks and the rubber parts of the wheels with a nice black primer. After the primer was dry, I weathered the tracks with my dust and rust diorama set from Life Color. I went over them with all of the colors heavily diluted in water, progressively from lighter to darker. Then I used the sponge and a thin brush to splash some more random colors on the surface. And I went over it again with more rust colors heavily diluted in water. Then I dry brushed with steel from Vallejo all of the teeth and the protruding edges of the tracks. I covered with more rust, and I finally painted with steel the parts of the tracks that touch the ground. Then I painted the exhaust, with the same colors and the same method I followed to paint the tracks pretty much. The only difference is that this time I would use the sponge to make some more visible deposits of rust on the surface of the exhaust. Then I would again go over it with the brush, with colors heavily diluted in water, again with the sponge, again with the brush, until I was satisfied with the result. Then I painted the periscope with German grey and the inside of the hatch with simple white. I glued all of the extra track links in place around the Hetzer. Then I painted the machine gun on the top of the vehicle black. And I noticed that it needed a tiny little hole on the front, so that the bullets could come out. I painted the metallic parts black, which I dry brushed with steel, and the stock I painted brown, and I dry brushed it with a lighter brown. For the jack, I tried to give it a more roughed up look, with many metallic parts exposed because the paint has peeled off. So again I used some steel, and for the highlights I used dark yellow mixed with white. Then I made a small extra piece of tarp to patch up a gap that I didn't notice was there when I was making the tarp in the first video. And while I was at it, I made another one, which I positioned along with a sledgehammer on the back side of the vehicle. Then I glued the extra road wheel on its position. And I started painting all of the extra gear that would go on the back. I painted the big box brown and the hinges silver. Then I went over it again and I drew little thin lines with a lighter brown. And I tried to gently dry brush it with a light grey. Then it was time to create some type of a camo pattern on the tarp. I painted all of it with a dark brown, and then I began making shapes with an olive green. Once I liked the result, I started making some tiny spots with a thin brush over it with the greyish green. And then I did the same with a lighter brown. And that was it. It looks pretty good. Then I applied the German crosses on the side and the back. I used the Decal Set and Fix and Softener from VMS. And since I started using these products, the decals on my vehicles look way more realistic than they did before. After the decals were positioned, and with all of the smaller details painted, it was time to start the weathering of the vehicle. With the exception of the tracks, of course, which I weathered before. First I went over all of the surfaces by using a sponge with a small amount of paint on it. Dark yellow mixed with white in this case, which makes us a lighter dark yellow. Then I did the same, but this time with a rusty wrought brown or red brown. Any spots I overdid, I would go back and correct them with a thin brush and a little bit of light dark yellow. Then I highlighted the bolts and some protruding edges with a little bit of steel. Now, with the chipping done, I could position the extra baggage on the back. I can also remove the multi-tack mask from the periscopes. It was finally time to proceed with the mud and dirt. So I made my mixture of light and sand dirt pigments from VMS. I poured in some water and I added ground texture from Vallejo. I applied it on the lower parts all around the hull. Then I cut some horsehair from an old brush and I applied them too for a little bit of extra variety. I added some more dry pigments on the surface, which I glued in place with the help of the enamel binder from VMS. Then I tried to create some water streaks on the sides of the Hetzer. For this I used white oil paint from 502 Uptilon. I also made dusty water accumulations on the surface of the Hetzer. This with the white acrylic heavily diluted in water. And then after everything was dry, I went over the whole surface with a brown pin wash and some mud splashes with the toothbrush for an anchor. I then mixed a little bit of PVA glue with water, in which I dipped the camouflage net. And I positioned it on the vehicle in a way that would be satisfying to me. I did some more splashes with the toothbrush around the vehicle. And then I finally removed the multitack from the axes of the road wheels. Then I glued the tracks in place. It was very easy to do this time, and also very satisfying since the Hetzer now has its whole form. Which it actually doesn't, since I also have to glue the side skirts in position. I tried to paint the barrel of the gun with black oil paint, but it was too oily, so I ended up using black pigment instead. Then I fooled around a little bit with the red oil paint, and I added some exaggerated rust streaks on the backside. It turned out to be too much, so I removed some of it. I also added some more water streaks and some mud drops with my toothbrush. Not the one I use for my personal hygiene, of course. I glued the side skirts on the sides. I made them dirty with mud and went over all of the screws with my standard steel from Vallejo. The last part of this handcraft creativity concert was to add a thin string to hold all of the equipment in place. I used my pincette to pass it through the holes and tie a tiny knot. I glued it in place with super glue. And then I painted it white with acrylic and I darkened it up a little bit with some brown panel liner. Oh, I also forgot to remove the multitack from this periscope. So this is the last part. And there you have it, friends and freundins. The Troglodyte is very satisfied with this one. I haven't built many, but so far this is the best tank I've made. Even though it's a Jagdpanzer, it's not a tank. I hope you, my friends and freundins, have enjoyed watching this video as much as I have enjoyed making it. If you have any comments, any suggestions, any remarks, please send them to me. I will be very happy to read your opinion about my work and also learn some new things, so that the Troglodyte can gradually become better. You should also, of course, leave a like on my video, and why not, you could even subscribe. Yeah, that would be nice. Again, thank you so much for watching this episode. And always remember, friends and freundins,